What's up, yo? Welcome to Your One Life. I'm your host, Kim Young Kim, and I'm super glad to have you as a listener today. If you're new here, here's what this podcast is all about. This podcast is about teaching you from the greatest minds in the world, assisting you in all aspects of your life, and showing you how to get out of jury duty through committing a crime during the jury selection process. #LifeHacks. Now, today's episode is about how to deal with and handle uncertainty. Research shows that uncertainty not only affects our mindset, but creates stress responses in our brains and bodies. And the stress, fear, and anguish that comes with uncertainty can sometimes make you feel like you can't move, freely live your life, or do the things you want to do. So in this episode, I'm going to break down how to live in the midst of uncertainty and move forward and thrive regardless of it. I'm going to share expert advice from psychologists, therapists, and others who work in the mental health space. And after listening to this episode, you'll be equipped with strategies that will help you to handle uncertainty and move forward in spite of it, instead of having it hold you back. And here's the truth we all need a reminder of. Life will always be uncertain. Think about this. Let's say you're going to pick up some fast food. When you get there, you don't know what's going to happen. They might accidentally give you extra chicken nuggets. You might meet the most attractive fast food worker in America. You might stop an armed robbery with your calming podcast voice, like I do every weekend. You don't know what's going to happen fully because life is uncertain. Here's a quote from a very famous author and intellectual named John Allen Paulos. "Uncertainty is the only certainty there is. Knowing how to live with insecurity is the only security." And that's spot on. Life is uncertain. That's what makes it scary, but that's also what makes it exciting. Think about this. Would you watch the Maury Povich show if you knew the answer to the question, in the case of this child, you are or are not the father? Would you watch it if you knew ahead of time what the answer was? No. Would you watch a movie if you knew all the plot points ahead of time? Of course not. Why is that? Because we don't like spoilers, and because uncertainty is a big part of what makes life fun and exhilarating. Now, at the same time, you do need strategies to deal with uncertainty, because if you don't learn how to deal with uncertainty, what's going to happen is you're going to become depressed, you're going to be negative, you're going to be constantly fearful, you'll be hiding under the throw blanket of safety, and you're not going to have the great life you want, because you'll never try anything unless it feels certain and safe, and that is no way to live. So, as I talk about uncertainty, I'm going to go over things you should do and also things you shouldn't do according to the experts. Now, speaking of experts, I read this article where they were interviewing a cognitive behavior therapist named Elena Fasan, and she said, "Facing uncertainty builds your distress and stress tolerance, but avoiding it, isolating, becoming very rigid and inflexible will decrease your distress and stress tolerance." So, here's the thing. You're going to need to build this muscle called dealing with uncertainty, because you're going to use it for the rest of your life. And as I think about that idea, I think about a quote that I really like that says, "Don't pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a difficult one." Bruce Lee. Now, one key to dealing with uncertainty is to have a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. This idea is backed up by a Green Beret commander whose name is Jason Van Camp, and here are his thoughts that reinforce this idea. Growth is not about living an easy life. A life lived correctly should be lived in difficulty. That's how strong people are made. But here's the deal. The reality is, unfortunately, our society is teaching us the wrong things right now. And Jason's point is, people should actually seek challenges and seek hardships, because that's what makes us strong. Now, I personally feel comfortable on stage speaking, performing rap and poetry, and even doing the Macarena. But there was a time in my life that I was terrified of all of this. And this was due to the failures I had in the past and the fact that I'm a regular old human. Did you know that the number 2 fear in the world amongst people is death? And the number 1 fear is public speaking? It's true. And now that Chuck Norris has passed away, death probably doesn't even make it into the top 5. But public speaking is terror-inducing for most people, and that's why most people aren't good at it. Now, I bombed a lot of presentations in high school and college, and I felt terrible about myself afterwards. Especially that one time I had mustard stains on my jeans that I'm pretty sure a few of my classmates were whispering about. And when I became a full-fledged adult, it didn't get much better. But I wanted to do this thing called youth motivational speaking, so I started speaking to teens, dealing with the uncertainty of what would happen, and totally eating it in front of them over and over. But the thing about it was, every speech I gave, I learned something from it. And I got a little better, and a little better, and a little better. To the point that one day people would come up and tell me, "Hey, you're a really good speaker." But that only happened because I kept trying and failing, but failing forward and failing upward. And this is how self-esteem is built. By trying something you've never done before, being a beginner, and improving over time and through repetitions. There are no shortcuts to developing your self-esteem or growth. So if you want to become the best version of yourself, which I'm sure is why you're listening to this podcast, you need to, as it's been said, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Embrace the uncertainty that comes with doing scary things and see it as a skill to become better at and see it as a challenge to take on. Psychologist Dr. Julie Smith, author of Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before, wrote that book to give people the tools that she shares in her private practice so we all had the opportunity to have a good life. And what she recommends when facing your fears is to do something that is above your comfort zone but below your panic zone, where you feel uncomfortable but not so much that you're huffing into a paper bag, unless that's how you get hyped up. By the way, I did a 4-part series on the book, which I'll make sure to tag in the show notes. Now, what ends up happening if you practice this is you keep leveling up, and eventually the things that are in your panic zone will be in your comfort zone. And from experience, it feels really good to grow in the activities that feel meaningful to you. And in the same way you're going to build your skills and confidence, you got to see your uncertainty tolerance as something to build up as well. Now, in order to deal with uncertainty, there's some things that we need to do. Number 1 is practice self-care. Experts across the board say, maintain a good diet, exercise, and socialize with people you care about because self-care allows you to be your best self and to face everything in your life. Self-care is winning. Sleep is winning. Have you ever tried to do something on 2 hours sleep? If so, I bet you're terrible at it. Now, just the other day, I was writing parts of this episode, but the problem was I had a terrible night of sleep the night before, and it just wasn't working. So I got some writing done, but wisdom told me just get a good night's rest and tackle it today. And I also took a nap before recording because I realized I need a little more juice in my battery, and because of that, the writing went well, the recording's going well, and I feel really good about this episode. Now, when I'm not taking good care of myself with rest, when I'm not eating for long stretches of time, or even worse, eating chalupas from Taco Bell, when I'm isolated for long stretches, I am at my worst and I handle things poorly. And what I've learned is you have to take care of yourself to deal with life's challenges and to deal with uncertainty. Which reminds me of a quote that goes, "It isn't the mountain ahead to climb that wears you out, it's the pebble in your shoe." Muhammad Ali. Now, in order to deal with life and the difficulties and uncertainties that you're going to face, you have to take that pebble out of your shoe, and self-care is taking the pebble out of your shoe. I read this one article by an author named Shweta Batra, and she said, your mind is more capable of providing you with the solutions to overcome your problems when it's relaxed. You can try simple things like taking deep breaths, taking a shower, listening to music, or just pacing around. And speaking of that, a lot of people who are really successful, when they're stressed out, or even just to relax, what they do is they go for a walk. And there are times where maybe you need to go for a walk because you're trying to deal with uncertainty and you're not soothed. And guess what? It's that pebble in your shoe again, and you're not going to be able to deal with stuff well when you're not soothed. Also, meditation could be the move. If you need assistance, there are plenty of YouTube videos to help you practice it. And there's also meditation apps like Calm and Headspace. Another thing that experts say is to actively work against worrying. There's this quote about worrying that I really like, and it goes, "Worrying doesn't take away tomorrow's trouble, it takes away today's peace." Think about that for a second. It doesn't take away tomorrow's problems. All it does is get you all worked up in the present. But how do you stop worrying? Well, one thing you can do is to stop watching the news, maybe turn your TV off. Because here's the thing about news shows. News shows pump negative content. That's what they're in the business of. And they have a phrase in the news world that goes, if it bleeds, it leads. So, turn off the news to turn off the negativity. And if you do that, that will make your life so much better. Now, I myself, I only get my news from positive sources like TMZ. And their tagline should actually be TMZ, everything you don't need to know. Now, I don't know what it is for you, but if it's social media doom scrolling, TV, news, radio, and even certain people, you need to not allow them to infect your mind. And if you have an energy vampire around you that only talks doom and gloom, guess what? You can avoid them. My mom always used to say, garbage in, garbage out. And that's real. What you let into your mind can lead to a lot of worrying and determines, to some degree, how your life goes. As Zig Ziglar once said, your input determines your outlook. Your outlook determines your output, and your output determines your future. Now, it's important to fight the good fight against worry because once you get on the worry train, it can lead to the spiral train, which will take you to a destination you don't want to go to. And me personally, honestly, once I go on a spiral, it can get ugly. And so what I do is I do my best not to go on spirals. And the thing about spirals is they're usually not based on factual information, but our imagination's running wild. There's this quote that goes, "We suffer much more in our minds than we ever do in real life." And that's so true. When I was growing up, do you know how many times in my mind I was put up for adoption by my parents? At least 1,000 times. Do you know how many times my parents actually went through with it? Only twice. Well, 3 times if you count the Craigslist ad. But real talk, we suffer so much more in our minds than we do in real life, and experts across the board say don't go down the path of what ifs. Don't go down that path because then you'll start thinking about the worst case scenario, and then you'll start thinking the worst thing that could happen actually will, and you'll start spiraling down real fast, and it all becomes gloom and doom, and that is terrible. So if you start worrying, do what you can to stop. And in order to stop, sometimes we need assistance. I have a close friend of mine named Ross, and if I ever find myself spiraling real bad, I'll call him up, and he'll talk me off the proverbial cliff, and I'll calm down. Now, in order to deal with uncertainty, experts say that you also need to distract yourself from negative thoughts by getting your mind off the problem. After the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake near San Francisco, which killed 57 people and caused significant property damage, researchers in a study examined people's reaction to the earthquake. And some people reported that they distracted themselves from negative feelings about the disaster by doing something fun with friends or by going to a favorite place to take their mind off the event. Other people reported they ruminated about the disaster by thinking about the moment the earthquake hit, the people who died, and what might happen in the next earthquake. And as you may guess, 2 months later, those who reported ruminating about the disaster had more symptoms of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder than people who instead distracted themselves. So if you're facing a problem that's causing worry or uncertainty, sometimes you have to get your mind off of it by doing something that's fun or distracting. Also, another thing that you can do to get your mind off the problem is to go and help other people. Because not focusing on yourself actually helps to boost your spirits. So anytime I'm feeling down, what I do is I go and find somebody to perform CPR chest compressions on. Now, do they need CPR? No. Does it make me feel good about myself? Absolutely. Is it worth potentially breaking someone's sternum to boost my spirits? Definitely. So if you see me out in public and I'm looking like I'm down in the dumps, just be careful. Now, in all seriousness, when you're dealing with uncertainty and you are focusing on your problems and what could happen and you're getting all worked up, helping others and bringing joy to people actually makes you feel better. I remember one time when I was just on a downward spiral one day, and it was bad, and I was spiraling and I was depressed, and my roommate at the time, he looked at me and he said, "Yo man, you're depressed because you're focusing on yourself. Why don't you head over to that Mexican restaurant that you love going to and go rap for the staff and go show love to that crew like you always do when you go down there? That's going to make your day better." So I took his advice. I went down to that spot. I started rapping for the workers there and spreading love and just being positive and kind. And as I did this, I did feel better. And I did forget about my problems. I've been reading a book written by Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama called The Book of Joy. And they say people who are the saddest are the ones who think about themselves nonstop. And one way to make yourself happier is to focus on bringing joy to others. The paradox in this is when you give, you truly do receive. And this has been proven on a scientific level. When you help others, your brain releases oxytocin, which is a chemical that makes you feel good. And if you can do it to the beat of staying alive, you'll feel even better. Another great tip on dealing with uncertainty is to focus on what you can control. Dr. Alice Boyes, a cognitive behavior therapist, says when dealing with uncertainty, try listing 3 quick bullet points about actions you can control. For example, if you're about to go on a first date, you can write down a list of humble brags to casually bring up. You can prepare a list of baby names you like, and you can make sure your Obi-Wan Kenobi robe is pressed to perfection. In all seriousness, if something happens, always ask yourself, what can you do right now? And I'm sure you'll be able to come up with more than 3 things. And as you act on them, you'll feel good because you're actually doing something about the thing that you're uncertain about, and you'll more than likely make progress. Now, when it comes to worrying, there is a such thing as productive worrying. There's a psychologist named Dr. Amelia Aldo, and she specializes in anxiety, stress, and depression. And she says that there's a difference between productive worrying and unproductive worrying. So, productive worrying is when you start planning and problem solving, and unproductive worrying is when you start making yourself miserable. So when you're productively worrying, you're doing things like making sure you have extra food for the day, or packing an umbrella for a possible rainstorm, or leaving a trail of breadcrumbs back to the house. That's productive worrying. Productive worrying is planning and creating contingency plans. Unproductive worrying is like when you stay up at night and you start running those scenarios of the worst thing that can happen. That's the difference. Now, her advice is, if there's nothing you can do about it, then it's not yours to worry over. And this reminds me of a scene from a movie called Bridge of Spies, where Tom Hanks is a lawyer and he has a client, and the guy is just really nonchalant as his life is in jeopardy and possibly facing the electric chair. And Tom Hanks says to him, "You don't seem alarmed." And his client looks at him and responds, "Would it help?" And his client is spot on. Worrying doesn't help. Worrying never helps. Giving yourself ulcers over something is not productive. And I've driven myself crazy worrying in the past, and I wish I could go talk to my younger self and say, it's not that serious. Calm down. And also, your unproductive worrying is making it that much harder to solve your own problems. Now, another important thing that we can do when it comes to dealing with uncertainty is to have perspective. To say to ourselves, I don't know fully what all is going to happen, but this too shall pass. This is not permanent, and even if it was permanent, you would become stronger by dealing with it, and you would become strong enough to handle it. But 99% of the time, it's not permanent, so don't worry. Now, having perspective is saying to yourself, this is not a problem, this is an opportunity. I remember years ago when my brother broke his knee in an auto collision, and instead of seeing it as a terrible situation, which is what a lot of people would see it as, he saw it as an opportunity. He said, this is actually an opportunity for me to understand what it's like to be handicapped. I've never really had that kind of experience, so now I get to learn the struggles of the disabled and have empathy for them. He also saw how he was now given the space to play guitar more and increase his skills, and he saw it as an opportunity to work on himself by reading and doing all these other things that he wouldn't have usually done. See, he had a good perspective on what he was going through, and perspective is so important. Now, if anyone knows this, it's Oprah Winfrey. Oprah, when she was in her 20s, fell in love with this guy. And recently she found these love letters that she wrote him. And as she read those letters, she started weeping over them. Not because she missed this man, but she wept for the woman that she used to be. She wept for this woman who fell in love with this guy that ended up being somebody she would never want to be with. But at the time, that breakup felt like such a terrible thing. And in my life, I've had at least a few women that I've been super into who didn't like me back. But I look at them now and I'm like, whoa, I dodged a bullet there. Because sometimes being friend zoned feels really bad until you run into that person at a family reunion. But real talk, even with women who broke it off with me, I find myself in deep gratitude that it didn't work out with them, because they aren't people that I would want to be with today. Life has taught me there are things and people that I wanted in the past that I don't have any desire for anymore. Now, on the topic of the past, when it comes to uncertainty, experts, they say to consider how you dealt with things in the past to deal with what you're facing now, but also to remind yourself that you've had victories in the past and you can have them with the uncertainty you're facing now. Now, in regards to perspective, remember this while you're dealing with uncertainty. A lot of people say that the worst thing that happened in their life actually turned out to be the best thing that happened, whether it was getting locked up, getting injured, or some other calamity that happened to them. So anything can be a good thing depending on how you look at it and what you do with it. And that's the only thing that you can always choose. You can always choose how you respond, and you can always choose your attitude. And those are from the words of Viktor Frankl, who is a Holocaust survivor who lived through a Nazi concentration camp, which is the most extreme example of uncertainty I can think of. He said the one thing that I've learned in those camps is that you can always choose how you respond, and you can always choose your attitude, and so can we. So make sure that you choose wisely. Another tip of helping yourself is from the American Psychological Association, and what they say is you need to take your own advice. Ask yourself, if a friend came to me with this worry, what would I tell them? And this is helpful because imagining your situation from the outside can oftentimes provide perspective and fresh ideas you wouldn't have otherwise. And as I said earlier, if you find yourself stressed out about the future and you find yourself struggling with uncertainty, find someone you can talk to about your feelings of uncertainty. This could be a friend, this could be a parent, this could be a relative, a mentor, but make sure it's someone you trust to help you through it. Now, I just started going to therapy again because I'm looking to make major changes in my life, and things feel very uncertain with these changes. And one thing I know is we weren't meant to do this thing called life alone. We all need a support network, so make sure that you reach out to yours when you're in a situation where you feel like you need help, so that you'll get the help that you need in the time you need it. All right, so that's all I got for this episode on dealing with uncertainty. I hope you gleaned a lot from this expert advice and put it into practice. And as you do, you'll strengthen the muscle that you need to deal with uncertainty, and you'll feel better. And when you feel better, you do better. And when you do better, you grow. And that's what this is really all about, living up to your potential and becoming the best that you can be. Now, if you're enjoying this podcast, please don't forget to hit the follow button so you don't miss future episodes. And please share this episode with anyone you feel needs to hear it. Also, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or comments on Spotify and YouTube. All of that helps with helping the show grow, and I appreciate you very much for doing so. All right, so that's all I got for now. I want to give a shout out to my dude Siraj, who made the instrumental for this podcast. And shout out to you for all the awesome things that you're going to do from these learnings. This is Your One Life. I'm Kim Young Kim. I hope you have a great day, a great week, and until next time, peace!